Okay, guys. Everybody, let's get going here. Okay, we've got two bills from the governor today, Senate Bills 482 and Senate Bill 484. And for the committee, we have a lot of witnesses on these two bills. So I'm going to urge you, one of the bills has 20 some witnesses, the other has 40. And if, as you know, we're in session around 11, I think. So with that said, keep the questions tight so we can get to session in timely fashion. Two bills, 2 hours. And we are going to start with Senate Bill 482. And I'm going to call up some folks. Where's the governor's team here? I'm going to call on 482. We've got obviously the governor. When he comes in, he's can come up to the table. Special Secretary Carmel Martin, Secretary Lopez, and Miles Hicks. So you're going to be on panel one. Maybe we'll wait a moment or two to see if Governor Moore shows up. And what we're going to do here, it's going to be a little unusual, but to make sure that both bills get presented timely, and then we still have the 11 o'clock session. What we don't want to do is, the first bill takes a lot of time, and we're going to have. So what we're going to do is we're going to take two panels of the governor's panels on Senate Bill 482, and then we're going to switch and let the governor present Senate Bill 484, and then we'll shift back to this bill and the governor and his panel for questions. So at least we will have formally presented the second bill, but everybody will get an opportunity to ask questions of the first bill. So that's just going to be how we do it. So that said, we want to wait for the governor to present the bill? Okay, so let's wait a couple of minutes. Again, keep the questions tight and we'll get through the two bills. What's that? Yeah, make sure your phones, all that stuff. Yes, and while we're waiting for the governor, Senator Watson has an introduction he'd like to make.
Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. If you remember when we started this session, I was a man down in my office. Well, now I'm a woman up. Today, my legislative director has started. Her name is Miss Shayla Moon. Will she please stand? She went to Howard University. Comes from Howard University, the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and her last position was as the National Urban League Senior Director of Housing and Economic Policy. So she is in the right place today. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Shayla.
And I'm sure when you signed up her first day, she was expecting to get applause from the governor of the state. Okay, Governor, welcome to the committee, the Education, Energy, Environment Committee. We're going to start with Senate Bill 482, and it's all yours. You take the time you need to present the bill. Okay.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Kagan, and thank you to the entire committee for the time, for the opportunity, and for the chance to talk about an issue that I know is incredibly important to each and every one of us, and that's the issue of child poverty. Before we do that, I just want to take this moment just to personally say thank you to all of the first responders, all the members of the Anne Arundel Police Department, all the members of the state police, all the members of the Capitol Police, for every single day making us proud, for every single day reminding us of a measure of importance. And I think yesterday was also a very distinct reminder of the level of professionalism and thoughtfulness that we have. And so we are deeply in debt to all of our first responders and to all of our colleagues. Thank you for everything you continue to do. And for And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to personally testify on this bill and to stand here with this remarkable panel that we have here to talk about the issue that we're dealing with child poverty within the state of Maryland. Because the thing that we know about child poverty, it's not impacting a demographic. It's not impacting a jurisdiction. It's not impacting a zip code or a census tract. As I'm literally looking around at each of your districts, I know each of your districts are wrestling with this issue. And the challenge that we've continued to see is that we've continued to wrestle with this issue. There's a map here that is right behind me that That's a map that I know that literally should and does keep us all up at night. This map over here is a heat map of the child poverty rate by census tract. And you can see how the depth of the red is not just challenging, it's everywhere. It's from Western Maryland and Mountain Maryland to the Eastern Shore. It is everywhere in between. And the thing that is there's two things that continue to make this map so unbelievably infuriating and frustrating and frankly very embarrassing. It's that there are people who are represented behind all those colors. Those are children who are being born into situations that they are not responsible for, but are being put in conditions and scenarios where there's almost a measure of impossibility for them to break out of it. The second thing that we know is this, is that when we look at that map doesn't look any different than what it looked 10 years ago. And it doesn't look any different than what it looked 20 years ago. The only difference is that the places that are red are getting redder. This is something that for none of us, we did not create this. We inherited this. But I can tell you right now that 20 years from now, if we don't fix this, that burden is ours. And that's how we'll be remembered. And so that's why we know that this issue of concentrated and generational child poverty is something that we just have a unique opportunity to be able to deal with and address in this time and in this moment. And we know that when we're looking at how child poverty is literally costing our economy hundreds of millions of dollars every year, we know that child poverty is continuing to not just drive poverty, but it's continuing to mask promise, that we actually have a unique chance to be able to take this thing head on and with a real measurement of seriousness. And that's why we're proud that this administration has crafted this bill called the Enough Act, working in partnership with many of you around this table and in this room. And what Enough stands for engaging neighborhoods, organizations, unions, governments, and households, or la-di-da-di everybody. But we know that enough is it's not just an acronym. Enough really is a governing philosophy. And it's how we believe that we can collectively move to be able to address this issue, because we do believe that the people who are closest to the challenge, they are the ones who are closest to the solutions. They're just hardly ever at the table. And so government can provide resources, we can provide expertise, we can provide collaboration, but to truly address this problem as it exists, it means we've got to engage the real experts in this work. And the real experts are the ones who are actually living in conditions that have to be addressed. And that's why our legislation calls on community leaders all across the state of Maryland to come together and to build the plans that are going to make their neighborhoods better. Because when we do it in partnership with schools and civic centers and local electeds and health clinics and homes of worship and other key institutions, we know that's where the answer lies, and we know that's where the promise lies. And so our premise is simple, that our communities are going to provide the vision, the state will provide the support, and not the other way around. The winning proposals will benefit from both public and private money, but we know that this act is about much more than just dollars and cents. We are going to build new partnerships in urban and rural and suburban parts of the state that are suffering from generational poverty. And we're going to build them with mentorship and expertise. We're going to ensure that our approach is written by them and not simply for them. And so I believe that money is important, but strategy and accountability and partnership are imperative. And that idea is at the heart of this bill. That every so often, I think about, we think about the idea behind this, and I'll say that every so often my phone will ring in the middle of the night. And the thing I've come to learn is that when my phone rings in the middle of the night, I'm never getting good news. And about 8 months ago, I got one of those calls. And that call was from the mayor of Baltimore. And the mayor of Baltimore called me up to tell me that there was a mass shooting in the Brooklyn community in Baltimore, and that dozens of people were shot, many of them children. And so then we spent the rest of that night marshaling resources, making sure that they could get whatever state assets were needed in that moment to deal with the immediacy of the tragedy that we now had on our hands. But the thing that also has continued to sit ever since then is not just the tragedy that happened that night. It's the tragedy that continued to happen many nights before. It's the reality that in our state, 1 in 8 children are living in poverty. In Brooklyn, the number is 1 in 2 children are living in poverty. These are these tragedies that we continue to see. They're terribly predictable. And we can't and we should not talk about this without understanding that child poverty is not just a consequence. Child poverty is a cause. And so our ability to be able to be thoughtful and aggressive on that is going to matter. And so what we're saying to all the members of the committee and to all of us and all the people who put us in these seats is that we're saying the time is now to say enough. Enough with a system where generational poverty and generational challenges continue to go unaddressed. Enough with a system where the same neighborhoods endure the same pain over and over again, so often that the pain is no longer piercing, it is now just chronic. Enough to be able to say that these issues can't be dealt with, because they can. And we're also saying with this is that we're all we need to be able to fix this, that we are enough, and that we have a unique opportunity to be able to take advantage of this moment. And so I urge a favorable committee vote on the Enough Act of 2024. And I'm thrilled to turn it over to the leader of our Government Office for Children. The person who's going to help to lead this effort, Secretary Carmel Martin.
Okay, thank you, Governor. Secretary.
Good morning, Chair Feldman and Vice Chair Kagan and distinguished members of the committee. I am Carmel Martin, Special Secretary for the Governor's Office for Children. As the Governor has eloquently described, the Enough Act is a first of its kind effort to tackle concentrated generational poverty. The research is clear, place matters. The neighborhood in which a child grows up has profound effects on the child's ability to thrive in terms of income, but also across a broad spectrum of outcomes, including incarceration rates, college attendance rates, fertility rates, and marriage patterns. The research is also clear about what works. Jurisdictions across the country implementing neighborhood-based initiatives that are data-driven, but also community-driven, in other words, bottom-up, not top-down, can deliver results. The Enough Act will focus on communities that have been left behind for too long. We will ask these communities to form partnerships across sectors, pulling together actors from government, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, philanthropy, anchor institutions, labor unions, small businesses, and corporations, but also across programmatic silos: education, workforce, healthcare, housing, public safety. And we will model this behavior at the state level through the Children's Cabinet, because this is an all-of-government approach. Funding will be allocated for technical assistance to support neighborhoods as they apply for and implement neighborhood-based strategies, neighborhood implementation grants, planning grants for communities who need additional time to assess needs and build a shared vision for community revitalization, and regional capacity building support. Communities will be asked to develop a strategic plan leveraging existing services, supports, and funding with an eye towards 3 core objectives: unlocking children's potential by providing a continuum of services and supports from cradle to career, building on the work being done under the blueprint, supporting economically secure and healthy families, and building safe and thriving communities, supporting small businesses, tackling community violence, increasing affordable housing. We will work hand in hand with communities that are navigating the planning process, the application process, and the implementation process. And we will support their efforts to secure additional funding from the federal government and philanthropy. I urge favorable committee vote on the Enough Act of 2024, and I look forward to your questions. I will now pass it to Secretary Lopez.
Before you go, Secretary Lopez, this bill is assigned jointly to the Budget and Taxation Committee. So I want to welcome Senator Joanne C. Benson from the Budget and Tax Committee today. So
welcome, Senator.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Secretary.
Certainly. Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and honorable members of the committee. I'm Rafael Lopez, and I serve as the Secretary of the Department of Human Services. We serve as one of Maryland's largest and leading child welfare and anti-poverty organizations in the state. And we believe the Enough Act will help us all spend smarter and wiser across our programs. While broader economic and policy factors drive poverty, children, youth, and their families are impacted by their environment every single day. Maryland's policy should center the lived experiences of children and their families to better align neighborhood and community resources. The Act calls on local grassroots efforts tailored to the people closest to the challenges because they are the ones closest to the solutions. Without coordinated interventions to alleviate adverse childhood experiences, multi-generational cycles of poverty become even harder to disrupt. Every day at DHS, we see the impact and the cost of doing nothing. In the work we lead in child welfare, doing nothing translates into the disproportionate representation of Black girls in foster care in Maryland. While this is Maryland's current reality, it does not need to be its future. Over time, we believe the Act will reduce family stress and the likelihood of a child or youth experiencing traumatic and unnecessary child welfare involvement. National research highlights families experiencing poverty are more likely to be reported for child neglect through no fault of their own. And what is another name for neglect in Maryland? Poverty. Neglect is the most commonly reported type of child maltreatment in the United States of America. 75% of reports to Child Protective Services, just like ours, involve allegations of neglect. Neglect is often reported when a caregiver is unable to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision, threatening a child's safety. However, an inability of a family to provide necessities for their children is not the same as an unwillingness to do so. Investing in families can build protective factors and decrease reports of neglect over time. Child maltreatment rates have declined by 56% over the past 30 years, but by contrast, rates of reported child neglect remain high. Maryland follows this national trend in every single one of its 24 jurisdictions. We can and we will do better, and the Enough Act will help us get there. We respectfully request your favorable report of SB 42 and look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Secretary. Miles, are you gonna weigh in, pass the mic down? And again, tell us who you are and then proceed.
Yes, good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Miles Hicks. I serve as Deputy Legislative Officer to Governor Wes Moore, and I'm here today in support of the Enough Act, and I'm here to answer any technical questions you might have about the bill. So thank you for having me today.
Okay, just to remind everybody how we're gonna handle it, we'll take questions now, then we'll go to a second panel from the governor. We'll do the same on the other bill, and then we'll come back to Bill 1 and start taking additional witnesses. So with that said, questions for the governor or his panel. Senator Washington.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Not a question, but a request, and also a thank you for taking this on, Governor. Thank you so much. Thank you for the statewide approach. Make sure that I speak in my mic here. So we have a joint, I guess it's asking for in the bill. I think it's really important you have an assessment, you're doing a report. Our body has a joint committee on children, youth, and families. And so an amendment that I would request is that the reporting come to that joint committee. I've chaired that committee. There are a number of folks in here. I believe our current chair of our Senate committee of the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families is here today. So that would be my request. So that's it. It's just, this is exciting. We look forward to partnering with you, and we want to continue.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Senator, and great. That was a great ad. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Additional questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none. So why don't you all take a seat, and we're going to get the second panel, and I'm going to call the second panel, the governor up to the table. Carol Naughton, Travis Simon, Rashern Bagler, our former county executive from Prince George's, John Michael, and council member Felicia Porter from Baltimore City. And I don't know, have you all have a sequence or predetermined order?
I guess we can just go down. We can sit here.
Okay, Mr. County Executive Baker, you want to lead off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will. First of all, it's good to be here in this committee. Good to see you. My senator and one of the longest serving senators, Joanne C. Benson. I'm going to be really brief. I love this program. I want to thank the governor for doing it. It reminds those of us from Prince George's County something we did, which was our Transforming Neighborhoods initiative. The governor talked about getting a call from the mayor about a mass shooting. What prompted us was we had 13 homicides in 13 days. And so as we gathered to talk about crime, we actually looked at what data was doing in those areas where we saw crime rising. You saw truancy, health disparities, lack of economic opportunity, and go on down the list. And so what we decided to do was not just focus on crime, but focus on three things. And that is, how do we actually change the quality of life in those neighborhoods? How do we bring government and connect it with communities down to the neighborhood level? And the only way to do that was to do what the governor's doing in this bill. And that's if you take all those agencies and you treat each part of these areas, we had 6 areas, as if they were their own mini city or county, bringing in top level folks from the government, but also infusing the community so that you actually get their interests. And so I would say there are 3 things I would leave you with. That is, you look at the data, because the data is going to help you drive it. You need that. Collaboration with all the organizations that are there. And finally, the leadership. The leadership at all the levels, I should say, finally, it's looking at wins, where you can actually get the community to see that this is working. And the only way you're going to do that is to actually have the community, the stakeholders, seeing where you can get those wins. And I think this bill would do it. And I'd ask a favorable report.
Okay,
you.
thank you. Who wants to go next? Okay.
Thank you.
Tell us who you are.
Good morning. My name is Carol Naughton. I'm the CEO of Purpose Built Communities, a nonprofit organization that works with local leaders nationwide to strengthen neighborhoods of concentrated poverty so that they become places with deep, durable pathways to prosperity for everyone who calls that neighborhood home. We are neighborhoodists, and we recognize that neighborhoods are important units of change. I'm here in support of the Enough Act. Purpose Built supports more than 25 neighborhood revitalizations across the country, including one here in Maryland in the Cherry Hill neighborhood of Baltimore. I've been doing the work contemplated by the Enough Act for 30 years, supporting people-centered, neighborhood-focused work that is designed to drive upward economic mobility, improve health outcomes, and greater racial equity. We know that siloed approaches to ending childhood poverty don't work, but comprehensive place-based strategies that are both cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary can effectively address the issues that keep children and their families trapped in poverty. Strong collaborative partnerships between public, private, and nonprofit sectors anchored in equity can result in transformative and sustainable outcomes that no one sector can achieve on their own. The Enough Act creates this framework. Let me provide you with a real-life example. In the Eastlake neighborhood of Atlanta, where I've worked for over 25 years, crime is down 90%. Incomes for hundreds of families receiving deep housing subsidies are 5 times higher than when we started. And neighborhood children attend one of the highest performing schools in the city, where the graduation rate is 95% every year. In short, income and graduation rates are up and crime is down. The neighborhood is inclusive with deep permanent affordability and access to the kinds of resources that every child needs. In our approach, nonprofit organizations that we call community quarterback organizations work with public sector partners, residents, and other stakeholders to create a neighborhood plan and then develop the strategies and partnerships necessary to implement. Cherry Hill Strong is the community quarterback organization in the Cherry Hill neighborhood, and it will nurture and sustain the revitalization over the long term. Community quarterbacks are the secret sauce to assuring that the neighborhood is inclusive and anchored in both equity and excellence as it becomes a healthier place to live. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony in support of the Enough Act.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Great.
Middle.
Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Josh Michael. Typically, I come before you as Vice President of the State Board of Education, which is in support of the bill. But today I'm here as board chair of Cherry Hill Strong, a nonprofit community quarterback whose mission is centered on supporting Cherry Hill residents' vision for community transformation. I'm pleased to share our excitement and support for Governor Moore and the Enough Act. Without knowing it, we've been preparing for this moment in Cherry Hill for over the past 5 years, laying the foundation for place-based work through the purpose-built communities model. In the 1940s and 50s, when pressure mounted in Baltimore to find housing for returning Black GIs, when it built to a boiling point, it was said that a wall couldn't be built high enough in East Baltimore to separate blacks and whites. And so the mayor used the Patapsco River instead and created the largest concentration of new black public housing east of the Mississippi on the Cherry Hill Peninsula along a polluted waterfront next to a city incinerator. Structural racism taxed the community for 8 decades. And today the unemployment rate is nearly 30%. The family poverty rate is 5 times the state average at 45%. Reading and math proficiency is less than 10%, and health outcomes demonstrate far too many avertible deaths. Yet in Cherry Hill, residents also have a vision and a plan. Inspired by its rich and proud history, the soul of the community is strong and resilient. And with the support and a place-based strategy, systemic change is happening and yielding early wins. Coordinated investments to engage families and promote early learning have led to dramatic improvements in kindergarten readiness, rising from one of the lowest rates in the state to now above the state average. The best of our city and state social programs haven't solved the riddle of concentrated poverty across 8 decades in Cherry Hill. This is so much more than a community school strategy. This is a comprehensive approach in education, jobs, housing, and health. Transformation by design, just like racism and poverty by design, is producing truly predictable outcomes. Our firsthand experience in Cherry Hill demonstrates the promise of the Enough Act for Cherry Hill and communities across Maryland where destinies of children are constrained by their zip code. I encourage your favorable consideration for these children, Maryland's children, through the Enough Act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Simon, you're next.
Good morning. My name is Travis Simon. I'm the Executive Director of SEIU Local 500. Chairman, Vice Chair, and committee members, it is my honor to testify in support of Senate Bill 482, the Enough Act. SEIU Local 500 represents over 20,000 working people, including the support staff at MCPS, family child care providers, faculty and staff at several colleges and universities, and many others. As an organization, we believe that when communities thrive, students thrive. We pride ourselves on the fact that our members can play a critical role in a student's educational career from early childhood to their completion of a terminal degree. This unique situation gives our organization a holistic perspective of what is needed to provide a top-of-the-line education from start to finish. For this reason, we support the passage of SB 482. The Enough Act establishes the Governor's Office for Children, with one of its intended goals being to ensure healthy and economically secure families through family-sustaining income. That would enable all of us to support Maryland's families. SEIU and our members recognize the need to support children, their families, and the communities surrounding them. We believe it truly does take a village to raise the next generation of Marylanders. As a diverse educator union, we constantly witness the detrimental impact that poverty imposes on a student's ability to learn. The plain reality is that poverty isn't just a socioeconomic status, it's a barrier to academic achievement and lifelong success. Our members know that ensuring all children have access to high-quality education will equip individuals, families, and communities for future success. We should do everything we can to eliminate obstacles that prevent children from accessing that education. The Enough Act will help us live up to that promise by breaking down barriers and addressing structural poverty at a local level. We would like to thank Governor Moore for bringing this historic legislation forward, and we ask for a favorable committee report on Senate Bill 482, the Enough Act. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Why don't you pass it down?
Yep.
Final witness on this panel.
Thank you, everyone. For the record, I'm Councilwoman Felicia Porter representing South Baltimore on the Baltimore City Council. And I'm here today in support of the Enough Act. Similar to Governor Moore, I received that call on July 2nd, indicating that there was an incredible mass shooting in my Brooklyn community. And it was a call that no leader wants to get, especially one when you hear some of the demographics and the data represented of South Baltimore. You know that I had a very large challenge ahead of me to get South Baltimore where it is today. The Enough Act not only provides us with an opportunity to right the generations of wrongs that we've seen in Baltimore and many other communities that we've seen across the state for so long. This is an opportunity to provide the foundation to community-based organizations and infrastructures for all the work that they are doing every single day on a shoestring budget. This is not about just $15 million being reallocated. This is not taking away from any legislation that we are doing here at the state of Maryland or the city of Baltimore. This is really about impacting and building upon what's already being done to change the everyday lives that we're seeing in our communities. And as legislators, we know when we talk about what's happening every single day in our communities, the environmental justice aspect, the food deserts, the technology divide, this is an opportunity to provide real funding and real strategy, a real data-driven, outcomes-based statewide strategy to making sure that we don't take this into our next generation of young people. We don't take this into the next generations of families that are living day in and day out, some multiple jobs in the state of Maryland. Let us make sure that we understand what we're doing here, and making sure that when we talk about what's happening in our state and in our nation, we understand that it is by design. And so let us take this moment to redesign and reimagine how we do government and how we do business and how we truly support the citizens of the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the entire panel. We're going to take some questions now. We'll start with Senator Hester, then Senator Augustine, and then back to Senator Washington. Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to start by applauding Governor Moore and his team for bringing the Enough Act forward. I love it. My question is for Ms. Naughton from Purpose Built Communities. Obviously, starting with the solutions at the local level makes sense. My question is about how we increase the amount of money we have available. So how can we, from your experience nationwide, right? What kinds of resources should we be looking to make sure that the Children's Office has so that it can leverage philanthropic and corporate sector dollars? Do we need a grant writer, a partnership broker? Like, what kind of skills do we need?
So yes to all of that. I think you're exactly right. This work has been proven to attract philanthropy. And so having a strategy and the resources to go after that philanthropy that support both the state level and the local level initiatives are key. I think the other thing that can happen is that the governor's office and that folks who are doing the work on the ground can get really smart about how we braid existing funding. How do we leverage housing funding? How do we leverage other kinds of funding? So it's all working in common purpose to strengthen neighborhoods, because investing in neighborhoods is investing in people. So I think having the resources to be able to go after that funding and tell a compelling story, a story that I believe you already have, can really attract that additional philanthropy that's going to be so important to this work.
Can I just add one thing? We actually did that in the county. And so when we started our program in Suitland, you might remember, we got Venture Philanthropy Partnership to come in and bring in their dollars, which we then couple with federal dollars and then neighborhoods to do exactly what you're talking about. So when you see a program like this, they do come in.
Okay, let's move around because we're gonna can't be here. Too many answers, too many questions. Senator Augustine and then Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chair Feldman. First of all, thank the governor for bringing it forward. And obviously, I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation. I think it's wonderful. I can't, I'll be brief, but of course, I'm only here because of Rashawn Baker. So I'm grateful for my constituent and my leader, eternal leader. So it's just always just wonderful to be with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Washington.
Again, thank you. And thank you all for the work you're doing. This is a question, but I just have to make some comments. When I was 2 years old, this country began the war on poverty. And there was a vision for a great society. But by the time I started first grade with the Tet Offensive, a declining sort of economy and the communities and folks began to we abandoned it essentially. What are we what are we doing? What sustainability are we doing to ensure that these programs, these initiatives will continue in spite of all the other pressures, whether it's a pandemic or a rise in crime or all the things that historically have taken us away from this fundamental battle. Just if you haven't done the math, I'm 62 years old and we have not ended child poverty, but I am happy that, oh my God, 16 years later, we have an opportunity to win this war. Please tell me how we're going to do it and how it will continue.
Senator, set directed. We don't need five answers
Okay,
on, that's a big
so
question. but-
okay,
yeah.
I will direct it towards anyone who feels most capable.
Yeah,
From
that's
your
putting the pressure on you
perspective.
guys.
I'll take a stab at it if that's okay. So thank you for that question. You know, I think we have been program rich and outcome poor, right? With regard to the programs that were supported by the War on Poverty. They were offered in silos and they weren't connected. They weren't necessarily connected either programmatically or by place. And so I think, you know, in our work, what we try to do is change the fundamental conditions in which people live, work, play, and learn so that great programs can take root. It's really hard to go to if you go to a great school, but you have to sleep in the bathtub at night because you're worried about bullets flying through your community. Going to the great school is not going to make that much of a difference in your life. So we've got to think about what happens outside of the schoolhouse as well as inside the schoolhouse and create comprehensive solutions that are designed to create a virtuous cycle of continued public and private investment in neighborhood and people. And the work that we're doing across the country is doing that now. Eastlake, 30 years, almost 30 years involved. Other neighborhood initiatives that we support, 15 years. There's an answer here.
And a request from that initial War on Poverty, we created community action centers that still exist today.
Yep.
My request is to please, that some of them are still working, connect them.
Yeah.
And then see how we can connect to them.
There's a reason why they don't let me come up here. It's the leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference is not that the programs weren't there. It's the leadership that you have. And that's why it's important that the governor is doing this. None of it will work because you're right. Administration will come and administration will go, and everyone's going to work in a silo unless the leader at the top decides this is so important that I'm going to put the right people there and I'm going to hold them accountable so that they're connected to the community. That's the only way it worked. That's how it worked for us. But that's why this is so important, that he's willing to put his, political capital on the line to saying, I'm going to make this work.
Great.
And I also share in Baltimore City. Okay.
Thank you all. I just wanted that again, we're taking it on as Maryland, and we do have an opportunity. We build the sustainability.
Okay, I don't want to get to Councilmember Porter. Why don't you take a shot?
Thank you. No, and I'll also share, that's why local representatives are needed as well. When you talk about the direction of funds, the direction of community-based organizations, local representatives are that nexus. And so when we have the governor kind of putting this at the statewide level, having that concerted in tandem action with your mayor, with your local council member, because that is what makes this process work. We have examples like the South Baltimore Gateway Partnership, which is a 13-member body organization in South Baltimore that is directing more than $10 million to community-based organizations. We have the SB7, which is leveraging real estate development funds through community impact funds to make communities better. So they are tackling issues such as housing. They're tackling issues such as substance abuse and public health interventions. They are tackling food deserts in their communities, making the name and stake for their communities on behalf of their communities.
Absolutely. Okay. Any additional questions? Seeing none, we're going to bring the governor back up on the second bill. As I said at the outset, we're going to go to Senate Bill 484, and Governor, your panel one on this one is Secretary Jake Day. I see the Secretary, Secretary Rebecca Flora, Nicole Doy Battle, Christine Madigan, County Executive Stuart Pittman, and that'll be panel one. And then again, we'll do the same thing we did on the other bill. We'll take questions here. We'll go to the second panel, and then we'll go back and take additional witnesses on the first bill. So Governor, it's all yours.
Thank you again. Hello again, everybody. And thank you again for the opportunity to testify, to personally testify on about this bill. For the record, again, my name is Governor Westmore. I'm the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland. Chair Feldman and Vice Chair Kagan, thank you again for allowing us to be here, for allowing us to testify, for allowing me to sit with this remarkable panel, and to all the members of the committee. Thank you again. We're here for the very distinct fact that Maryland continues to face a very real housing shortage. And it's not something that is hurting some of us in some communities. It is something that is ravaging communities all throughout our state. And it's the reason why we think being able to have a real statewide approach and putting this package together, why it matters. Because if we do not address the fact that right now Maryland has added over 5,600 units to our housing unit shortage every single year for the last decade. If we're not addressing the fact that we have a total of at least 96,000 unit shortage that we have in our state, if we don't address the fact that weak supply results in skyrocketing costs, and just look at basic dynamics of supply and demand, we continue to have a increasing demand. We continue to have a shortage of supply. It's going to continue driving prices up. And if we don't address the fact that we're talking about the top driver of poverty in our state, that housing insecurity is the top driver of poverty in the state of Maryland, and that Maryland is the 7th most expensive state to live in, we know that we have something that does not just have immediate impacts, but is going to have future impacts. There was just a recent study that showed that today, 30% of young Marylanders would consider leaving our state because of housing costs. 30% of young Marylanders would consider leaving our state because of housing costs. We have no shot of winning the decade if they choose to take their talents elsewhere. We have no shot of winning a decade if the people who we should be incentivizing to stay, providing pathways for them to stay, choose to say, we would love to, we just can't afford to. And so, members of the committee, the housing crisis remains one of the greatest threats that we have to Maryland's long-term success. And that's why our administration has assembled the most comprehensive housing package that a Maryland administration has introduced in years. And a key to that package is the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act of 2024. Our legislation contains 3 major components. First, the bill incentivizes development. In Maryland, we have a strong track record of protecting areas where we shouldn't build housing. And those include areas like our precious farmland and our wild habitats. And we are going to honor that tradition, and we're going to protect that tradition. But we need to do a better job of incentivizing housing where we should be building. And that's exactly what this bill does. This legislation streamlines the regulatory process and allows specific projects to be built with greater density, and meaning that it aligns with the criteria that have been laid out. So if you plan to build housing within 1 mile of a passenger rail station, you will likely benefit from this bill. If you plan to build housing on the site of a former state-owned property, you will likely benefit from this bill. If you are a nonprofit and you're focusing on supporting some of the most vulnerable in our society, our seniors, then you will likely benefit from this bill. Now, second, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act cuts the red tape for projects that are subsidized by programs under the Department of Housing and Community Development. This bill will empower us to protect projects the state has invested in by ensuring that they are not unreasonably denied. If the state is going to be a lead underwriter of projects, the state should have some role and say as to how those projects continue to be evolved. And third and finally, our legislation updates building codes by allowing for the permitting of new manufactured homes in areas zoned for single-family residential use. This provision helps us to address the long time frame of construction. It's going to open up pathways to home ownership and wealth for more Marylanders. And now, as I said before at the beginning, the top driver of poverty in our state is housing. the top driver of wealth in our state is home ownership. This is literally a way of being able to attack this problem at its barbells, where some of the greatest challenges we have in our state deals with housing. Some of the greatest opportunities that we have in our state deal with housing. And so by increasing supply, we're increasing opportunity to be able to participate in the opportunities to grow right here in our state. And by working together to pass this bill, we will incentivize new housing that's affordable. We will streamline the building process, and we will make it easier for Marylanders to become homeowners. The basic idea that you should have the opportunity to pass something off to your children besides debt. Now, I want to be clear. Our bill will help us to pursue each of these objectives in a bold and balanced way. We put together this legislation moving in partnership with Marylanders everywhere, and we've consulted with local government partners along the way. And that's why we're proud of the fact that this bill has earned the support of both the Maryland Association of Counties and the Maryland Municipal League with amendments. And so the reason they're excited about this legislation, that we watch how MACO and MML are excited about this legislation, is because they know who it's going to benefit. It's going to benefit the teacher in Rockville who cannot afford to buy a home in the same neighborhood that they grew up in or that they teach in. It's going to benefit the police officer in Baltimore City with 3 kids who cannot make a single family budget work. It's going to benefit the senior in Cheverly who's struggling to keep pace with rising prices. That's who this bill benefits. And so members of the committee, we can make Maryland more affordable, and this bill will help us to get there. I strongly urge a favorable committee vote on the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act of 2024. And thank you for your time. And I believe I'm now passing off to our spectacular Secretary of Housing Community Development, Secretary Day.
Okay, thank you, Governor Moore. Secretary Day.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, esteemed members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jake Day. I serve as Secretary of the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. As Governor Moore said, in order to address Maryland's 96,000 unit housing shortage and rising housing costs for all Marylanders, we must increase housing stock. Every state in the union right now is trying to solve the housing crisis for their citizens. And in the landscape of ideas, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act is a common sense and moderate way. Fundamentally, the bill seeks to reduce or remove artificial regulatory obstacles to producing more housing, the kind of red tape that is holding Maryland's economy back. For example, portions of the bill, such as the density bonuses close to transit, incentivize housing in areas where we should encourage growth. These are areas where more units would support the existing character of the surrounding community and build upon existing infrastructure. This option developers would have to increase the number of housing units is sensitive to the objectives of underlying zoning and limited to very specific locations in the state. These are specific locations where the state, communities, and taxpayers have already made the choice for density and the investment in supporting it. In fact, we incorporated transit-oriented development into the act due to conversations we had directly with local jurisdictions on how to incentivize the right kind of growth, recognizing that Maryland's communities are starving right now for economic growth. As indicated in polling released just today, 61% of Maryland voters support a state law requiring local governments to allow more homes near rail transit. 62%, even more voters, support a law to require allowing more income-restricted homes near transit. Responding to our housing crisis by establishing statewide incentives for density is a natural fit for state law. Maryland has a long history of adopting statewide policy to restrict housing where we shouldn't build it, but until today, we have failed to finish the job to incentivize housing where we should build it. As we developed these market-based incentives, we were mindful that as the shortage grows, we must not leave behind those families with the least means to house themselves. Housing of all shapes and sizes will be needed to address this crisis, but we must be careful to not create policy that will widen the gap in affordability for those who need housing that they can afford, that the market will not otherwise naturally create, like the Cheverly police officer and his wife who works part-time so she can take care of their child. Hence our requirement for integrating affordable units into any development benefiting from the market rate density bonuses. We're open to further discussion on what these affordability percentages should be, so long as we are accounting for the Marylanders who most need a place to live where they work. Through partnership with this committee and with the General Assembly at large, I'm confident that we can make a Maryland that is a desirable and affordable home for all. Thank you for your time and deliberation, and I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 480.
Thank you, Secretary. A lot of references to Chevrolet here.
That's right.
It'll be, if all five of you do throw out D4, it's gonna be a little.
We have lots of other jurisdictions we can
Okay, we got one Rockville, two Chevrolets. We're gonna keep score here. Secretary Flora.
Good morning, everyone, and Chair Feldman and Vice Chair Kagan, everyone that's here today. Thank you for being here. For the record, I'm Rebecca Flora, Secretary, Maryland Department of Planning, and here to support SB 484. My testimony will be very specific to the density bonus and particularly its application to historic state-owned campuses and complexes, but I'm here to answer any of your questions related to this overall bill. As an accredited planner, and actually as a former developer in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, I have directly experienced some of the barriers that we're trying to push through to the other side. Density bonuses are an effective tool. They've been used across the country, and they actually do make a difference in terms of projects and getting these things done. For the housing developer, a density bonus provides added number of units or floor area square footage. This in turn reduces the per unit cost associated with site and common area improvements that have only gone higher and higher over the years, and they have to be spread across the project. Basically, these projects don't pencil out. You just can't make them work, no matter what you throw at it. So you need to put all the tools you can put there to make them work, to get quality affordable housing for these people that we're trying to and we must house. For historic state-owned campuses and complexes, the bill targets these often blighted properties that we know, you all know where they are, located across our entire state. They are exceptionally unique and really wonderful properties, but they're incredibly challenging to redevelop. And there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it be remediation or just going into disrepair. They will remain underutilized, creating negative impact on surrounding community without this added boost. The Smart Growth Subcabinet's recently completed Preservation and Disposition of Maryland's Historic Complexes report provides recommendations to catalyze redevelopment of these places, and the application of a density bonus would be an added tool to stimulate redevelopment. Finally, for the public, this bill takes the necessary precautions to ensure there will be minimal to no impact on our communities. This is done through an overlay approach that ensures existing underlying zoning parameters remain intact and are scaled appropriately for surrounding context. I've reviewed this very carefully, and I feel this is a very reasonable approach that takes into consideration our existing communities. The bill also serves to advance what we know to be a core element of thriving, lasting communities, and that is mixed housing stock that supports a variety of household types, incomes, and sizes that in turn fuels a diverse local economy, creating synergistic balance. These things must work hand in hand. In many places, the housing stock and our zoning is out of balance with market drivers and community needs. The Maryland Department of Planning data-driven analysis and tools such as the Transit Station Area Profile tool that I believe you have a link to highlights the needs that we are working on to address this through the bill and will assist its localized implementation. And the Department of Planning stands ready to help our local communities with the implementation and through the use of tools so that we can do this the right way. Thank you for your time today. I'm here to answer any questions you may have on the bill. Thank you.
Secretary Flora. Why don't you want to pass it down? The next witness.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, the distinguished members of the committee. My name is Nicole Battle. I am a Baltimore City resident. I am the CEO of Govins Ecumenical Development Corporation. I'm a member of Leading Age Maryland and a developer of permanent, affordable, supportive housing for older adults and those who have experienced homelessness. I come before you today in support of Bill 484, the Housing Expansion Affordability Act of 2024. GEDCO is a 30-plus-year-old community-based nonprofit started by 7 pastors of various denominations who wanted to address a need within their congregations. That need was affordable housing for seniors. Today, GEDCO is the master developer of Stadium Place, Senator Washington's district. That's located on the former Memorial Stadium site where the Orioles and the Colts used to play. Since 1991, at the site, we have close to 500 older adults. It's a mixed income community for seniors 55 years and older. Since 1991, GEDCO has expanded our mission to provide permanent supportive housing for those who have also experienced homelessness. We also address emergency needs such as eviction prevention, utility assistance, and unemployment. Today, there are waiting lists for affordable senior housing communities that this density bonus and regulatory incentives will help address. This housing shortage is impacting some of our parents, our siblings, our aunties, our uncles, whose primary source of income may be a small pension or Social Security. They can't pay $15.32 per month for rent and pay utilities and purchase food and pay for their prescriptions and also pay for a bus pass so that they can get to work, because some of these seniors are working. They don't have families that can help supplement their income like maybe some of you are currently doing for your family members. Those who will benefit from this bill are from communities like yours. Some have watched gentrification or crime take over their neighborhoods, forcing them to move somewhere safer or more expensive. The 50% affordable standard is a high bar, but it's important to making a dent in reducing housing insecurity and homelessness among our seniors. I appreciate you, your time, and your consideration this morning. Please vote favorably for Senate Bill 484.
Okay,
Thank
thank you for your testimony. County Executive Pittman.
County Executive Stuart Pittman, Anne Arundel County. Good morning, Vice Chair Kagan and Chair Feldman. So I first want to say, just put in a plug off script for the Enough Act. We've got 4 communities of hope. You know, my mentor back here from Prince George's County, we replicated some of what they did there, and we're ready. We're ready for the program. But you know, housing is the key to intergenerational wealth, and it is the portal to poverty, and that's true in Anne Arundel County as well as across the state. So I got to say, the county executives were a little nervous when they heard that the state was going to be doing some housing policy, and don't like to be preempted. And I was less nervous than most. I actually said to my friends at MACO, where I'm on the board, this might be a good thing because some of us don't have the political will to do the right thing on housing, and we know that. And sometimes it's good to have the state require us to do those things. I think the fact that DHCD works so closely with MACO on this bill, I was at many meetings about this. Some of them were contentious and some of them were really inspiring and positive. And I think we're in a really, really good place with this bill. What's important to me is that we've got the Secretary of Planning and the Secretary of DHCD working on this because it's a land use issue. And in Anne Arundel County, what's happened is that, you know, we respect the fact that Maryland is a smart growth county, and we've really always had a plan for smart growth. We often call it sustainable growth now. But government for a long time really said we want commercial development, not housing development, because we don't want to have to build schools, and commercial development is really more profitable for the government. And we had a lot of people in communities saying, really, we don't want more people living in our jurisdiction. We got too much traffic and overcrowded schools. That kind of shifted, and I think a lot of people were responsible for that shift in our county, where we started to say the opposite. We started to say we have a lot of vacant retail space, and we're requiring commercial development in it when it's mixed use. We actually need more housing, and we need more affordable housing. So, you know, we had some people 20 years ago. Senator Pam Beidel, your colleague, was probably a bit ahead of her time when she tried to get a moderately priced dwelling unit requirement passed in Anne Arundel County. We're still working on it. We're very close to getting it done. But what I have learned is first of all, the way to get the public to support the housing policy is to say we're still going to protect open space. We're still going to protect nature, and we're going to do density. Density is not a dirty word. Density is the way to do affordability. It is a way to get the developers on board so that they do pencil out. And it is a way to get the community on board because we're protecting open space while we're doing the housing. So y'all have really focused on the right thing here. It's what we're doing in Anne Arundel County. How to get that density bonus is a big topic of conversation in our county. And I think that we're at that moment. We're at that moment where we can really deliver. This is only a part of the solution. The other parts of the housing policy are great as well in the Enough Act. But if we don't give local governments that framework and that incentive and that sort of leadership to say that density is the way that we're going to do this housing, but we have to require affordability. We have to set standards on the percentage. Then we're not really going to make progress. So it's an amazing time. You know, we elected this governor to leave no one behind, and I think that, you know, by supporting this bill, we're giving his team the tools to get the job done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. County Executive. Let's go down to the end of the table for the final witness on this panel. And again, introduce yourself.
Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Christine Madigan. I'm the president of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition, or MAKE, which is comprised of 185 member organizations across the state. MAKE strongly supports Senate Bill 484, the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act of 2024. And I'm here today to talk specifically about the Adequate Public Facility Ordinance, or APFO, provisions of this bill. And as an aside, I'll note that the original APFO bill itself included in its original purposes the express purpose of advancing affordable housing. The state's acute housing crisis is well documented, and the only way to solve it is to build more affordable housing. The APFO provisions of the bill will help make that happen. Specifically, these provisions will block local jurisdictions from denying a tax credit or other state-financed affordable housing development solely on the basis of an APFO. While APFOs are important to ensure that public facilities are not overextended, they're too often used as tools to outright deny viable projects for other reasons. This bill removes that barrier. Importantly, however, the bill does not block APFOs altogether. Local governments will still be able to apply an APFO to address public facility concerns. What the bill will do is to prevent the unreasonable application of APFOs that are so difficult to comply with, they become de facto denials. A reasonableness test will apply. I'll also note that at the request of MAKO, the APFO section of this bill will sunset after 15 years. To address Maryland's housing supply and affordability, build them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll take some questions. Again, everybody keep the questions tight because we got a lot of work today. Okay, we're going to start with Senator Washington, then we'll go to Senator Lewis Young.
Okay.
And
Again,
Vice Chair Kagan after that.
thank you all very much. And I'm just so excited that so many people from the 43rd district are here. I think that means something, Mr. Governor, including you, a former 43rd district member. So this is some practical, it's about the bill. So some questions so that as we're working on it, we can work and understand the amendments. So Mr. Governor, if you could decide who would answer this, permitting, right? To construction, et cetera. A lot of it's in MDE. So I don't see MDE here. And so, and then there's the planning department has a role around the 10-year plans that local jurisdictions submit to the planning department. But currently in code, they don't have any authority to enforce or even evaluate during the 10-year period, you know, these plans. So in looking at the parts of the bill where there's the unreasonable limitations, sort of setting that part. And then also, I don't see the protections for the environmental impacts, right, on previously overburdened communities. I'd like to hear how we could address that, and if you're open to where it's appropriate and consistent with the goals that the environmental protections, like you have a prohibition around setbacks. Sometimes setbacks are needed for protection. So
Yeah, if that's all right, Governor. So Senator, I think it's important to recognize that the reason why we have those comprehensive plans in statute and many of the protections that you're talking about is because the value of this state has long been that we believe that growing smart growth is something that should be enshrined in state and local law and not toyed with and messed with. And so I don't believe that anything about this legislation undercuts that. I don't think anything in this legislation would change the existing stormwater or other environmental protections that are afforded under law. And in fact, as a planner myself, and I'm not the only one at the table, so feel free to disagree with me, Madam Secretary. But as a planner myself, I can tell you, the most ecologically sensitive decision that can be made is where you place the buildings. And so when we put buildings in the right places in our, when we infill, we're doing the right thing from a macro perspective.
I get you. I don't want you to use too many words in that. This really has to do with the permit, like the applicant, like actually the permit process, the ideology, the goal, but the practical fact is that how one gets a permit, one part of it is through MDE, right? And then, so like maybe the plan, and then there's other permits that are local permits. And so the coordination and the authority, we might need some additional language to empower some entity or to be able to enforce these things and to evaluate it. I just feel like there are some not conflicts, but I think we need some more authority sort of delineated in order to actually make this work.
And can I just add, obviously we're gonna have some conversations offline here after the hearing. So as much as I want to spend, a lot of time here, the conversation will continue, but that said, you absolutely attempt to respond.
Senator Washington, first of all, thank you for your question. I think excellent thought. I mean, when we think about the overall development process, there is the pre-development stage and all of the hoops that you have to go through during that stage. Some of them are local, and yes, in some instances, critical areas, things like that, there are, state permitting things that have to be addressed also. The thing about the density bonus, it is strictly related to an overlay in local zoning. And so addressing all the other pieces of that pre-development process to get to the point where you can actually break ground is something that what I love most about our cabinet. We all work together really closely. So I think that's something that we should follow up with you on and really look at that process overall and basically assure you today that the goal is to focus on this overlay as it relates to a zoning aspect.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to add that, in 15 years as a mayor, council member, planning commissioner, the only time that I ever encountered MDE having an explicit permitting role was when we were building things on septic. So outside of municipal jurisdictions, outside of areas where sewer systems existed. So MDE doesn't play a critical role in permitting around most housing development, particularly what we're talking about. Most of those powers are delegated down to the local authority that are enshrined in state law, yes, but are delegated down to local authorities and are made at the county and municipal level.
Okay, Senator Lewis Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this bill. I represent Frederick County, which is the fastest growing county in the state. And as part of that growth phenomenon, one of our greatest challenges is affordable housing. But accompanying that challenge is infrastructure and ensuring that the infrastructure keeps up with growth as well. So I'd like someone to elaborate on how we can do that, because we need to be looking, and the secretary mentioned transit, but highway expansion, water, sewer, education. I know that's a big topic, but if someone could talk about how those issues work with this plan, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Senator. So I think we all agree to that point. I also think that as was referenced by Ms. Madigan, the APFO language in state statute references that one of the purposes of creating that part of state law and allowing for counties and municipalities to adopt their own adequate public facilities ordinances was not only to enable them to have sufficient highways and streets and sewer pipes and water pipes, but also to have sufficient affordable housing. And it's one of the forgotten aspects of that legislation. I also think, to your question, what this legislation does, it does not undercut local jurisdictions' ability to enforce their APFO in order to extract, whether it's fees, funding, or the requirement to support the construction of adequate public facilities, so long as it doesn't affect the density, viability, or affordability of those projects, recognizing we need affordable housing. So what it does is it says they can't be weaponized, they can't be misused to deny a permit. And that's really where we've come in the use of adequate public facilities ordinances. They have occasionally, not always, but they have been misused to deny permits or to de facto deny permits, really as a way to stop a development rather than to extract what's needed to get the adequate public facilities.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And one closing thought on that is that the state financed housing units that we're talking about, on average, that's 1,500 units a year. We have a breakdown by jurisdiction we can provide for the committee. We're not talking about an overwhelming number of housing units in this state in the context of all housing development. But again, this is a critical facet, the affordable units.
Okay, we're going to go to Vice Chair Kagan next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Madigan, Secretary Day, Governor, and Senator Lewis Young. The question of the adequate public facilities ordinance has really been a problem. And I had personal experience when I was working on 2 different affordable housing projects in Rockville about 15 years ago. The coded language and the racial messaging were disgusting. And we heard lots of, those people. And lots of those people are going to, destroy our housing values, and those people, blah, blah. And those people have lots of babies and our schools are already overcrowded. My question is, how are you going to deal with the NIMBYs to make sure that we can move forward on this?
Sure.
The NIMBYs and the
You
haters.
and my
I'll say
county.
both.
You are absolutely right. In Anne Arundel County, in the previous, before I was elected, before our current county council was there, they actually lowered the threshold for adequate public facilities for schools so that they could close districts to new housing development if they weren't at 95% capacity. Most are at 100 or even higher.
Yeah.
And the language behind it was, yeah, we're going to stop development this way. It came from a council member after we had tried to do a LIHTC, low income housing tax credit project in his district, and he didn't want it. And this was his follow-up to that. So that's why it is so important to put into state law that affordable housing is a good. It is a public good at the state level. And so a county cannot ignore it. And so a county will figure out how to do adequate public facilities and should. This is not a huge number of units. Unfortunately, I wish it were, but it's not a huge number of units impacted. But then you can fix it. So in our county, we finally put this, that we had 10,000 empty seats, and we had schools that were half of our county was closed to housing development because so many of those feeder areas were impacted by that law. We changed the law so if there was an adjacent district that had capacity, you couldn't close a district. And then the school board said, well, we might as well just go ahead and redistrict, and they did. So now the whole county is open to housing, and we've solved the problem without spending a dime.
Thank you, County Executive Pittman. Let me just remind you, we're also talking about municipalities and those with zoning capacity and authority. So
Madam Vice Chair, can I just add to that, that when we talk about those people, I want to remind us, this is a market-based incentive. This is an incentive for developers to choose. But those people who I know are referenced frequently in these debates at town halls and county council chambers, in Montgomery County, a first-year Rockville police officer and their spouse, a full-time student, that's 60% AMI. $65,121 a year. A married couple, 3 kids, spouse with a spouse who's an IT specialist for the county health department in Montgomery County, making $78,000 a year. That is 60% AMI. I mean, we have really drawn caricatures that unfortunately are driving the debate rather than the reality.
Right. No, this was workforce housing. And it was disgusting. And the project was really challenged and defeated in its initial image. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Senator Watson, then Senator Gallion next. So Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Governor, for putting this together. I think the goals are very admirable. Just have a quick question and a request. When I first started talking about this, I was provided a map that showed kind of a density map for Prince George's County. And we know that the areas that could really be impacted by this are those closest to DC, where the metro stops are. I asked for a statewide map to see how everything is going to be dispersed. And I got a map of Prince George's and Montgomery County. I would still like to see a statewide map because I'm concerned. I understand about density, but I'm concerned about aggregated density. And so if we really lay this out, is it really just going to be Montgomery County and Prince George's County, that are doing this, or are we really going to have shared responsibility throughout the state? So I'd like that map. My question is,
I can tell you, Senator,
yes,
we can provide that to you. We actually have plans that can show how when we're talking about the idea of ensuring that we can have a measurement of density, but making sure that that density is not a density of a jurisdiction and a density of an area. We show what that actually looks like in terms of from a statewide perspective.
and also the state-owned property.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
My question is
COD,
this.
state-owned properties, et cetera.
Yes, yes. My question is this, and this goes back to Secretary Flora. You had mentioned that there are many communities where we have blighted areas, vacancies, and we need this to boost those other areas. There was a gentleman in here who testified yesterday that said there are 13,000 vacancies in Baltimore City today. And so just give me a little sense of how, if we move away from these areas that are already in the city that might not be on a transit area, but build up somewhere else, how do we fill those houses?
Well, I'm going to ask Secretary Day first, because I know he's working on that program, and then I can add on to that in terms of sort of how this relates to the overall zoning.
Thank you, Secretary Flora. So Senator, two things. One, I think in my written testimony, there are links to a statewide TOD map created by the Maryland Department of Planning, as well as a statewide map of the historic state-owned properties, formerly state-owned properties. If they're not linked in my testimony, we'll get them to you today. We'll get them to the entire committee today. Second, to your question, so Baltimore City does have about 13,570 vacants as of this morning. I check it pretty frequently now. That's a pretty significant decline in the last 4 years. So we've seen a decline of about 4,000 units in that period of time. I think Project Core, which is proposed to be funded at $50 million in the budget this year, is the reason why we've seen that decline, but it must be steeper because there are significant countercurrents that are the result of all sorts of things: the carrying costs of vacancy, the externalities, the opportunity cost of vacancy. If you look at that map of transit-oriented development areas, you'll look at Baltimore City. Almost all of it is covered in the 1 mile radius. So we're talking about the very neighborhoods and the very communities that are most affected by vacancy today. And we'll, again, make sure that that map gets provided to you. Yes, sir.
Senator Watson, our team planning created those maps and those tools, and we'd be happy to they're really an amazing tool. And I really do want to highlight them for everyone, because without those kinds of tools, we don't have the data and the information we need to really understand and make those good decisions. So anything we can do to help you navigate through that, we'd be happy to.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Governor, for being here in person to be here to present and also to ask or to answer questions. That's greatly Greatly appreciated. My question is focused around partnerships. I know, Governor, you brought up in the State of the State address, that was a hot word. You know, we heard a lot about partnerships. So
71 times, I believe.
was that how many times? It was like, so with that being said, as we look at partnerships, some local governments do support this legislation. Others want major changes to amendments, and others are outright opposed. For example, the city of Havre de Grace went as far as to even pass a resolution in opposition. And just for full disclosure, that's where my 4 children are going to school in the public school system in Havre de Grace. So just to consolidate their concerns, if you could help me with these. They're worried about the state overriding local zoning authority, number one. They're worried about overcrowding schools. I mean, we're worried about, when we talk about nurses, teachers, police officers, they don't want to be sending their children to schools with close to 40 people in them. And the traffic has been brought up, and that is a major concern of mine, because as you go around the state, we appreciate the CTP, the transportation meetings. We're hearing in the out years, it's not fully funded. So when we're going to add density, add potentially a great deal more population, but in the out years, the funding's not there for the roads. I was 2 hours getting from Havre de Grace to Annapolis this morning. So those are concerns. So if you could just help me with that issue, that partnership with some of the folks that are not on board and are really struggling, feeling like the heavy hand of the state's coming down on them.
Yeah, I'll take it briefly on term secretary. I understand the concern because oftentimes it's true, and I think the county executive pointed out that in a lot of these conversations, that measure of partnership has not been there. And so just historically, this has been a very difficult dynamic of what becomes that level of interaction between the state and the locals. One of the things we're really proud of with this bill is this bill really is a point where we're showing the input from the local jurisdictions was very much incorporated. You look at things like even like the 15-year option layout. I mean, that was after direct conversations with MACO and MML. And so we think that a lot of those components actually have been incorporated with amendments that I think was part of the thing that got organizations like MACO and MML to come on board, and local jurisdictions to see how this is useful. We do also understand the challenge of how do we think about it from a planning perspective when you are adding on population. What does that mean for services? That's why we think that planning component of how we're thinking about TOD. How are we thinking about the way this is going to be utilized when it comes to transportation assets and also other shared assets like schools? That all that has to be rolled into this plan, because it's not heavy-handed. It's really saying how can we utilize incentives to be able to bring local jurisdictions on board. So it's not so much heavy-handed, it's really more hand in hand about how these things are going to be working together. But it's just simply saying that if the state is also, whether it's through light tech, et cetera, where the state is going to be utilized and being an underwriter, that the state should have a greater level of involvement and partnership as to how the permitting process and the planning process actually looks.
Governor, if I can just add, so Senator, thanks for the question. Starting with the municipalities that may not agree with their counterparts, you'll notice, I'm sure, that I'm wearing my past president pin for MML, the really fancy pin they give me, solid gold, I'm sure. My time leading that organization of 157 municipalities and 3 special taxing districts, what that taught me is that we don't always have unanimity when we come to decisions. I think it's the right of every jurisdiction who's a member of that organization to express their own opinion. The organization does its best to represent the general thinking through the legislative approval process and through the LC, the Legislative Committee, and MACO, I know, does the same, although that organization is a mystery to me. I'll let County Executive Pittman speak on their behalf. I think the responsibility of our responsibility now is to, and I want to understand what Havre de Grace's concerns are and work with them, because what I hear, and you spoke to this just a second ago, is that fear about the number of children in a classroom, the number of cars on a road. I think those are all reasonable concerns. The amount of sewage running through a particular sewer main, all of those are really specific concerns that are worth conversation. But what I want to put those in the context of is that the additional density allowable in these areas, in these specific areas, is 30%. And it's on top of that, 30% is on top of whatever the base zoning is. These are zones already created for development that the local jurisdictions have decided this is where we want our people to be. This is where we want our growth to go. This is where we want economic development to happen. And we're talking about not a 100% increase, not a 500% increase or 1,000% increase, but a 30% increase when the developer elects to exercise that increase. So I think we're not talking about overwhelming anything, but we are talking about a marginal increase. And so I just want to make sure we're adding that context to the conversation.
Thank you for your response. And just one more specific question, I believe the Secretary Day. And this, I think this might have been brought up maybe in the information letter by Prince George's County. I'm not positive, but are there any protections against for-profit developers creating a nonprofit entity to exploit the development concessions given to them?
So yeah, great question. I think Christine Madigan would be best able to speak to that. And what I would say is, I don't think it would benefit them sufficiently to give up the profit on a project to add the density that would be allowable on nonprofit owned property. But I'll turn it over to a nonprofit developer to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that in this industry, affordable housing developers are in it primarily for the mission, not for the money. So the underlying financial incentives aren't there in and of themselves. And so that's number one. Number two, I believe the language of the bill is quite clear that kind of formation of a secondary entity would be prohibited, that the controlling entity needs to be a nonprofit.
Okay,
If I could just add one more comment, I just want to make sure we remind everyone that these housing needs that we're talking about, these people are here. I chair the affordable or the accessory dwelling unit task force. And, you know, someone recently testified at one of our meetings that 4 households are living in one house. And so I think we do have to keep in mind what this data is telling us about the impact on our existing infrastructure is already there. We're trying to just make this livable conditions where people can actually thrive in their communities. So it's just one aspect of this. I think we just really need to keep at the forefront. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see no additional questions. Thank you, Governor, and your team.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring up that second panel and take questions after that, and then we may have to break and reconvene to continue those hearings. We have an 11 o'clock session, obviously. So I'm going to call up Mayor Megan Cook from City of Easton, Mayor Michael O'Connor, Frederick City, Councilmember Christiana Rigby from Howard County, Reverend Mary Canahan from City of Easton, Jonathan Rondeau from the Arc of Maryland. So I've called 5 folks up, and each of you yeah. So this is panel 2 on Senate Bill 484. And for the members of the committee, what we're probably going to end up doing is after this panel, we may have to go to session, and then we will reconvene back on that first bill, take all the witnesses have signed up, and make it just a normal bill hearing at that point. And so with that said, who wants to lead off for this second governor's panel? Mayor O'Connor, why don't you start off?
I'm happy to. Thank you, Senator Feldman, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, members of the committee, to speak about Senate Bill 484. I want to talk about it a little bit from the aspect of community. We're very much appreciative of the administration reaching out to local governments and wanting to have these important conversations, because housing may be the most important economic development project that we can do in our communities, because what it does is it builds economic development for individuals and for families. And you've heard the testimony already that we're talking about people who are already here. And so what does that mean in the sense of community in a place like Frederick? As we grew and developed, we never aspired to be a bedroom community for Montgomery County. We still don't aspire to be a bedroom community for Montgomery County. We want the people who live in Frederick to work in Frederick. But we also understand the dynamic that prevents that is the high cost of housing. And it's not just housing, it's access to transportation, it's access to healthcare, it's access to childcare. It's all of the things that are wrapped up into being a part of that. But when we cannot house in our community all of the people that do all of the jobs that we know are part of a community, that a community is not just one thing, it's everything, then we're failing as a community because we're losing cohesion. We're losing connected tissue that builds community. We have residents then that have no choice but to drive until they qualify. And those are often the people who are most in need of the access to quality childcare, quality healthcare, transportation. And so for me, the importance of trying to figure out how we address this affordable housing crisis and what this bill does is narrowly tailor some solutions towards that AMI that we're trying to fill, that missing middle, the workforce housing that we need, is building those incentives so that we can create stronger communities. Because I can tell you that is what Frederick aspires to be. We aspire to be a strong community, and we can't do that if we don't have an adequate housing supply that serves all of our residents at all income levels. Thank you very much, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mayor. Who wants to go next? Yeah, don't touch it.
Yeah.
Lemoria. There you go.
All right. Good morning, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. I'm Christiana Rigby, County Councilperson for Howard County, and I represent both TODs in our jurisdiction. Counties often hesitate to implement the comprehensive zoning process due to its complex, contentious, resource-intensive, and frankly painful nature. However, the governor's proposed bill addresses this issue by allowing for targeted changes in areas where local communities have already expressed their support to the state, fostering a thoughtful and collaborative approach to development in transit-oriented development zones. When looking at student generation and public facility impact from TOD development, we need to recognize the facts. Apartments generate fewer students than single-family housing and have a lesser impact on public infrastructure. Unfortunately, most local adequate public facility ordinances are a one-size-fits-all approach that ignores the reality of differing unit types bringing in different amounts of revenue and having differing expense impacts on counties and public facilities. The APFO considerations in this legislation do not extend to all development everywhere. They only touch a very small number of state-partnered projects. Further, the environmental impacts of not building in these locations are much worse than building in them. The community building redevelopment that this bill is focused on will reduce climate emissions, place modern stormwater infrastructure in the ground, reduce ongoing infrastructure maintenance costs, and provide an option for people to live in the communities where they work. What's the TLDR? Multifamily buildings in TOD zones generate less students than all other housing types. We need to focus on incentivizing the types of building that we're missing, where we're missing it, to infuse our local and state budgets with the dollars needed to fund our budgets without increasing our expenses. If we want our communities to succeed, we need to be able to invest in them. If we want the blueprint and our children and our teachers to succeed, we must have the dollars to do it. And if we want businesses to thrive and a strong economy, we have to have a stable housing environment. I am happy to be a resource and dig deeper with you if you have any questions. I'll just end with, opponents will tell you that the sky is falling, but at best, this will be a few drops. Thank you for your open-minded and data-driven approach as we address our statewide housing and budget challenges, and I respectfully encourage a favorable report.
Okay, sir, you want to go next? Tell us who you are.
Yeah. Good morning, distinguished members of the panel. I am Reverend Tyrone P. Jones IV. I pastor First Baptist Church of Guilford in Columbia, Maryland. And I'm here today to represent people acting together in Howard and our two sister organizations, Action in Montgomery and Anne Arundel, Connecting Together. We have collectively been working on affordable housing for over 20 years, playing a key role in helping to win over $1.2 billion for affordable housing and winning thousands of units across the state, including thousands of units in many transit-oriented sites like downtown Columbia, Bethesda Chevy Chase Library, and many others. We initiate all of our organizing work by holding listening sessions, asking our neighbors to share what gets in the way of them wanting to see their families thrive in their communities. And overwhelmingly, we have heard that people are in need of housing. Across the board, the issue we hear most frequently is the need for affordable housing in particular places. In fact, there are a few families who are not affected by affordable housing in at least one of their family's generations, be it seniors, middle-aged, blue-collar workers, young professional college graduates, and the like. And this cause is also personal to me. I am a part of the sandwich generation. My mother, who worked over 30 years as a healthcare professional, is living with me. She's living with me because she cannot afford on her fixed income to live on her own. Also, my son is a recent graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride. He is also home with me because he grew up in Howard County but cannot find an affordable place within the county to live. And so they're all living with me. Pray for me. To address this problem, we strongly believe that there is a need to develop more transit-oriented housing and more transit-oriented affordable housing to meet the growing demand. It has been proven that affordable housing is one of the ways to move people out of poverty, bring stability to a family, build generational wealth, and leave a legacy for succeeding generations. We also believe with the continuing concerns around vehicle pollutants, it is a necessary need to build transit-oriented housing. Additionally, we believe the focus on making the most of land owned by nonprofits is a bonus. I know that some of our religious nonprofit organizations are considering repurposing some of our property assets for affordable housing. So if some of them can overcome their particular zoning challenges, we welcome the opportunity to build affordable housing on our properties. I'm here to voice a strong support for the Governor's Housing Expansion Act. We appreciate that it focuses on affordable housing near transit and makes the most of land owned by nonprofits as well as the state. We all know the need for affordable housing continues to grow. However, this legislation is an effective start to fixing the problem. Please know that our nonprofit religious organizations stand ready to do our part. Thank you for this opportunity to testify for this legislation worthy of your consideration.
Okay, thank you, sir. Who wants to go next with our final two witnesses?
Good morning, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and Senate committee members. My name is Megan Cook, and I'm mayor of the town of Easton. And I'm here in support of the bill, which is addressing one of the most challenging problems facing our state, adequate affordable housing. As mayor of Easton, I can assure you that the affordable housing issue is not endemic to Maryland's metropolitan areas. With a population of over 17,000, we are the smallest town represented on this panel. Producing more housing at an affordable rate continues to be one of our greatest challenges. Median values for homes in Talbot County have eclipsed $470,000. Currently, Easton's median family income is $99,000, almost 20% higher than the average. Even with higher than average MFI, and assuming that a family has capital to provide a down payment, a typical family is still well short of the amount needed to afford a home in our town or county. It's a problem we not only hear about from our residents, but we see reflected in our own organization. Almost 70% of the town's workforce commutes from other communities. Relying so heavily on surrounding counties and states to supply our workforce brings many negatives, such as increased traffic, infrastructure repair costs, and the loss of tax revenue to support our town. We're also sending a negative message to our talented workforce when we're asking them to protect and serve a community that they can't afford to live in. I believe this is such an important issue that I'm here to urge your support of the bill, even though it does have limited applicability to Easton. I do so because even incremental improvements would be helpful, and I hope that this bill will be a catalyst to a more comprehensive approach to the housing supply crisis that can be more broadly implemented statewide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Okay, we'll go to our final witness on this second panel.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Rondo, and I'm the president and CEO of the ARC Central Chesapeake Region. I'm here today in strong support of Governor Moore's housing agenda, especially Section 7504 of the legislation concerning density bonuses for 501c3 organizations. The ARC Central Chesapeake Region is a regional organization serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Anne Arundel County and Maryland's Eastern Shore. In 2007, the ARC founded Chesapeake Neighbors, our affordable housing nonprofit subsidiary, to create quality, affordable housing opportunities, not just for people with disabilities, but for people and families in need of access to housing. We specialize in creating scattered site, mixed income housing options that blend affordable and market rate housing. Density bonuses allows developers like Chesapeake Neighbors to tailor affordable housing to communities' needs with greater nuance, a critical tool to create diverse and inclusive communities where that need is. For example, in Anne Arundel County, on a large acre lot where we had a single family home, because of the county's workforce housing density increases for this zone, we are able to increase the number of units, now having 4. We are currently in the first phase of creating additional units at additional sites. Density bonuses allows us to increase the economies of scale while staying true to Chesapeake Neighbors' scattered site philosophy. As a nonprofit developer, we do this work through a combination of grants, government funding, and financing through commercial banks. By comparison, private for-profit developers tend to focus on higher unit counts and a more market rate using LIHTC tax incentives. For organizations like Chesapeake Neighbors to be able to meet the needs of the communities we serve and increase housing options for those who need it most, such as people with disabilities and those families of low income, we need a robust network of tools, and these density bonuses do just that. I encourage a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony and for the entire panel. Any questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, what we're going to do now, it's 10:45. We're in session 11. So what I'm going to propose is we will reconvene after session, a half hour. For those of you who signed up for these 2 bills, we have to go to session at 11. A half hour after we're done there, we're going to come back here and we'll start the hearings, picking up, starting with 482 witnesses signed up, then 484, and then we'll move to the rest of our normal bill hearings. So that's going to be the plan. And so with that, for now, we'll temporarily adjourn, and then we will reconvene here back at half hour after session to continue these 2 hearings.